You know, when Video Arts asked me if I'd like to talk about creativity, I said no problem. No problem. Because telling people how to be creative is easy. It's only being it that's difficult. And I knew it would be particularly easy for me because I spent the last 25 years watching how various creative people produce their stuff and being fascinated to see if I could figure out what makes folk, including me, more creative.
So now, what is happening after 25,000 years or 15,000 years of agriculture is that the processes that seemed eternal, the processes of tilling the fields, smelting metals, establishing markets, cutting deals, so forth and so on, have in our lifetimes emerged as self-limiting processes. You know, people think I'm a wild-eyed character because I predict some kind of transcendent transformation of the world within our lifetimes. But if you could sit in on the board meetings of the people who own the planet, they possess data moving across their desks every day which entirely support my contention that business as usual has been taken off the menu. You have only to propagate the curves of population growth, of HIV infection, of ozone depletion, of toxification of the oceans, so forth and so on. We all know the laundry list, to convince yourself that business as usual is no longer an option. There is no middle way. There is no Ozzie and Harriet third millennium scenario. The choices are either a hideous, nightmarish world, a Soylent Green kind of world, a world where people of privilege defend that privilege with tremendous establishments of armament and propaganda, and the rest of the world slips into poverty, starvation, desperation, and death. This is the kind of world that rationalists fear. And it's also the only kind of world that they can imagine because they are bankrupt of inspiration and ideas.
Creativity is not a talent. It is not a talent. It is a way of operating. So, I'm working at the moment with Dr. Robin Skinner on a successor to our psychiatry book, Families and How to Survive Them. We're comparing the ways in which psychologically healthy families function, and then the ways in which such families function with the ways in which the most successful corporations and organizations function. And we become fascinated by the fact that we can usefully describe the way in which people function at work in terms of two modes, open and closed. So what I can just add now is that creativity is not possible in the closed mode. Okay?
You look around you, the entire global civilization is undergoing some kind of meltdown. The planet itself is now to be seen as a kind of alchemical retort. The prima materia to be transformed are the nuclear stockpiles, the toxic waste dumps, the industrial wastelands, the populations devoid of hope, the populations at threat of infectious and fatal epidemic disease. Trying to manage this rationally with some political ism, fascism, Marxism, capitalism, goes nowhere. It just digs us deeper into the mire and the muck. at the fringes, people like yourselves, people like myself, people I associate, offer endless solutions. Recycling, restraint in childbearing, increased sexual, toleration of unusual sexual styles. Many, many things are suggested, but nothing happens because the primary agenda of society has not yet been dissolved, has not yet come into a state of fluidity sufficient where a new imprint can be put upon it.
Let me explain a little more. By the closed mode, I mean the mode that we are in most of the time when we're at work. We have inside us a feeling that there's lots to be done, and we have to get on with it if we're going to get through it all. It's an active, probably slightly anxious mode, although the anxiety can be exciting and pleasurable. It's a mode in which we're probably a little impatient, if only with ourselves. It has a little tension in it, not much humor. It's a mode in which we're very purposeful, and it's a mode in which we can get very stressed and even a bit manic, but not creative.
Because you see, the people who run the world are becoming more and more panic-stricken because a world is ending. Their world is ending. The world of the shell game and the international corporation and the propagandized passive electorate and all these things that have been, that game is ending. And there is no substitute vision being discussed at the upper echelons of the control mechanism of this society. It's coming from the grassroots. The people at the top are too paralyzed with the poisons they've imbibed by feeding at the trough of the old order. They can't think their way out of their dilemma. In fact, they have to pay guys with ponytails just to turn on the machines in the morning. They're so distant from the things they rule, you see.
Nevertheless, I can at least tell you how to get yourselves into the open mode. You need 5 things. 1, space. 2, time. 3, time. 4, confidence. And 5, a 22-inch waist. Sorry, my mind was wandering. I'm getting into the open mode too quickly. Instead of a 22-inch waist, read humor. I do beg your pardon. Okay, let's take space first. You can't become playful and therefore creative if you're under your usual pressures, because to cope with them, you've got to be in the closed mode, right? So you have to create some space for yourself away from those demands. And that means sealing yourself off. You must make a quiet space for yourself where you will be undisturbed.
If I believe this world were controlled by governments, religions, bankers, and large companies, I would be freaked out indeed, But I don't think it's controlled by any of those. Those groups are all reacting, They would love to control the planet. Of course they would. But, my God, it's so complicated. It just keeps slipping through their fingers. Right before here, I was in London and staying in Westminster, which is the government part of London where all the big ministries are. And at night, I would have to walk from the ICA, about a 20-minute walk back to my hotel, through the darkened streets of Whitehall and Westminster. And in those huge ministry buildings, after 1 o'clock in the morning, there are so many lights on, so many lights are burning in the chancelleries and ministries of the governments of this planet. And you know why? Because it's getting out of control. It's slipping from their grip. They have worries. They're poring over maps. They're looking at computer projections, saying, what the hell are we going to do? So they're not gaily conspiring to run the world. They're frantically planning to try and hold on to their own pathetic bit of turf before it's wrested from their grip.
To summarize, the third factor that facilitates creativity is time. Giving your mind as long as possible to come up with something original. Now, the next factor, number 4, is confidence. When you're in your space-time oasis, getting into the open mode, nothing will stop you being creative so effectively as the fear of making a mistake. Now, if you think about play, you'll see why. True play is experiment. What happens if I do this? What would happen if we did that? What if? The very essence of playfulness is an openness to anything that may happen, a feeling that whatever happens, it's okay. So you cannot be playful if you're frightened that moving in some direction will be wrong, something you shouldn't have done. I mean, you're either free to play or you're not. As Alan Watts puts it, you can't be spontaneous within reason. So you've got to risk saying things that are silly and illogical and wrong, and the best way to get the confidence to do that is to know that while you're being creative, nothing is wrong. There's no such thing as a mistake, and any drivel may lead to the breakthrough.
This is what the cultural enterprise is for. We want to live in the imagination with the body as a freely commandable object in the imagination. In other words, replace the laws of physics with the laws of dream or imagination. This is culturally within our reach right now. I mean, if it were as important as piling up nuclear stockpiles or screwing people over in 100 different ways, we'd have it in 5 years, not 17. As it is, we'll probably have to wait 17 years. But the fact that we can make a model like that, that's a bridge from where we're sitting to a spiritually transcendental realm that's within reach, is, I think, very positive. Now all we have to do is fill in the blanks. Keep taking psychedelics so that our engineering standards stay high, so that we stay focused on the goals that we're trying to maximize, and then try to promote the idea that anxiety is inappropriate. Anxiety poisons the will to action. And I really think that this is going to be the task of the high-tech alternative culture, is to provide an optimistic vision.
The open mode is a relaxed, expansive, less purposeful mode, in which we're probably more contemplative, more inclined to humor, which always accompanies a wider perspective, and consequently more playful. It's a mood in which curiosity for its own sake can operate, because we're not under pressure to get a specific thing done quickly. We can play, and that is what allows our natural creativity to surface.
We are bankrupt of inspiration and ideas. And so the entire effort of the establishment has become one of holding down panic, keeping the ball in play, keeping ordinary people and ordinary populations quiescent through drugs which are not psychedelic, through forms of media which are not transcendental and inspiring, but which are narcoleptic and deadening. I won't name any names here. And this is the fiction that we live in, and this is why our situation feels so schizophrenic. And of course, as we go through this presidential election, the contradictions are heightened almost to the point of nausea, because what is under discussion is what manner of fine-tuning shall be applied to the social machinery in order to make it possible to hold together the illusion of business as usual. And the answer is there is no such fine-tuning. It's all finished. And instead, what is needed is a radical openness to new ideas of all sorts.
We need to be in the open mode when we're pondering a problem. But once we come up with a solution, we must then switch to the closed mode to implement it, because once we've made a decision, we are efficient only if we go through with it decisively, undistracted by doubts. In other words, to be at our most efficient, we need to be able to switch backwards and forwards between the two modes. But here's the problem. We too often get stuck in the closed mode. Under the pressures which are all too familiar to us, we tend to maintain tunnel vision at times when we really need to step back and contemplate the wider view.
Governments do not understand what is going on. National governments are underpaid, understaffed, and under-talented. World corporate divisions of various sorts do understand what is going on, but they are in the process of taking power from the national state.
Recently I was in London, and the hotel, the conference was at the ICA, which is down near Buckingham Palace, and so the hotel was on Vincent Square. So it was about a 20-minute walk from Vincent Square down to the ICA, and it's right through Whitehall. It's where all the intelligence agencies and the Ministry of Defense and all this, and we would stay late at the ICA, and walking back at 2 in the morning, the lights in Whitehall are burning at 2 in the morning. The lights at the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Economic Planning are on at 2 in the morning. Why? Because people are sweating blood in those buildings. They are rainforest clearing statistics. Look at this oil slick. Look at this. This is costing us money, gentlemen. What about this? And the answer is you can manage some of the future some of the time, and you can manage all of the future some of the time, but you can't manage all of the future all of the time. It keeps breaking loose in the most unexpected fashion. The Internet is a perfect example. Here was a privileged instrument of the intelligence community and the scientific elite that served it. Ultra-high security, totally out of the reach of the common man. And meanwhile, over at Raytheon, they're trying to, this was years ago, they were trying to develop a chip to guide a heat-seeking missile and for the Navy. And they had certain design specifications which had to be met. And the project had ground on for a couple of years, and they couldn't make this chip meet the specifications. Finally, the project was canceled. The chip is thrown in the trash. And then some engineer digs it out, and he says, you know what we could do with this? We can't hit a plane in flight with a missile with this thing, but you know what we can do with it? We could make a little desktop computer with this. And these guys said, why in the hell would we want to do that? We have enormous computers. We have computers the size of a city block. Why would we want to do that? You say, no, you don't understand. Not for us. We have the godlike technology. It's a commercial thing. We can sell it to the Marx, and they can word process with it or something. So it came to be. But then they didn't understand that these things, it's a pretty harmless thing. A computer sitting on a desktop with Word running on it. But you sell 20 million of them, and before you realize, my God, they can all be connected together. And then people just plug them in, and an entirely new beast springs into being. A technology so powerful that the head of the CIA 10 years ago didn't have that kind of access to information, that kind of access to real-time imaging, that kind of access to econometric data and that sort of thing. And so it escaped. And so while they were watching various, while they were keeping us from building nuclear weapons, they seemed to do that rather well. No terrorist has ever set off a thermonuclear device, so far as we know. So they were watching from the ramparts for that because it was something they could understand. This thing came rushing in the back door, and now the cat is out of the bag.
This is particularly true, for example, of politicians. The main complaint about them from their non-political colleagues is that they become so addicted to the adrenaline that they get from reacting to events on an hour-by-hour basis that they almost completely lose the desire or the ability to ponder problems in the open mode. So, as I say, creativity is not possible in the closed mode.
I think the election just proves that the world corporate state has made national governments irrelevant because, while everybody's yakking about the election, the real news is lowest unemployment in 4 years, continuous growth into, the 27th month. Lloyd Benson retired 3 days ago and said if he could write the numbers, they wouldn't be any different than the numbers he's able to retire on. The economists are going berserk. And I think that what has happened very quietly over the past 10 years with chaos theory and fractal mathematics and this sort of thing is that economics has come out of the woodshed. It is not voodoo anymore. And the world corporate state is running a very tight ship. And look at the changes that have gone on just in the past 5 years. Marxism has been liquidated. Apartheid has been liquidated. The people in the Middle East have been told to get their stupid act together. The Irish question comes up for review. World trade barriers are dropping everywhere. These are all things on the agenda of the world corporate state.
Now, the people I find it hardest to be creative with are people who need, all the time, to project an image of themselves as decisive, and who feel that to create this image, they need to decide everything very quickly and with a great show of confidence. Well, this behavior, I suggest sincerely, is the most effective way of strangling creativity at birth.
So I think, if you have a United States senator threatening the life of the president, this tells you that these people are a bunch of irrelevant yahoos. It's like the Parliament of Tonga or something. It means they can get up and say anything they damn well please. The president doesn't matter. The Senate doesn't matter. None of it matters. It's a road show, and we're all incredibly focused on it. And why is that? Because an instrumentality of the world corporate state called the media makes very sure that we speak of nothing else. Meanwhile, in the background, large changes are being put in place. And I'm not doctrinaire on this. What we need to find out at this point is not what the Republican Party wants. We need to find out, what does the world corporate state believe?
So, to summarize, the third factor that facilitates creativity is time. Giving your mind as long as possible to come up with something original. Now, the next factor, number 4, is confidence. When you're in your space-time oasis, getting into the open mode, nothing will stop you being creative so effectively as the fear of making a mistake.
They feel that they own the planet, and so they're very alarmed. I mean, wouldn't you be if it were your property? And say, my God, what is going on? We have to get hold of the neighborhood. But my faith is that the horse knows where it wants to go, and we're all being carried along for the ride. And, you know, Mitsubishi, the Catholic Church, whoever wants to try and control it is welcome to try. But it's a perverse thing. I mean, we who think of ourselves as little people imagine that owning the earth must be a great pleasure. But actually, you know, the number of ulcer tablets being consumed in the chancelleries, bourses, and embassies of this planet seems to argue that thinking you own the world is an enormous headache and aggravation.
And the other thing is, at the top, it's remarkably empty. You know, you think, if you've never been there, that toward the top of the control pyramid, there must be many people standing in line, eager to take the helm, eager to make big decisions and establish their reputations and do whatever they do. Instead, what you find is fear as you go up the hierarchy. My God, if I make this decision and it goes wrong, I will lose my chairmanship, or I will lose my something or other. So as you approach these enormously powerful levers for manipulating society, everybody's holding their hands behind their back. They don't want their fingerprints on the lever because they know, you know, that there could be war crimes trials if you stumble and get it wrong. I mean, you may have thought you were on a golden crusade. Suddenly you're looking at 12 guys in powdered wigs who think you're a jerk, and they're going to hang you for the stunt you pulled. So it's like that.
And now, the last factor, the fifth, humor. Well, I happen to think the main evolutionary significance of humor is that it gets us from the closed mode to the open mode quicker than anything else. I think we all know that laughter brings relaxation and that humor makes us playful, yet how many times have important discussions been held where really original and creative ideas were desperately needed to solve important problems, but where humor was taboo because the subject being discussed was so serious? This attitude seems to me to stem from a very basic misunderstanding of the difference between serious and solemn. Now, I suggest to you that a group of us could be sitting around after dinner discussing matters that were extremely serious, like the education of our children or our marriages or the meaning of life, and I'm not talking about the film. And we could be laughing, and that would not make what we were discussing one bit less serious.
There should be no emotional investment in these structures. I mean, what I've learned from the mushrooms ultimately is that ideas are for play, and the final payback from all of this is a sense of fun, a sense of humor. The truth, for sure, when it arrives, will make you smile. If it doesn't, you should seek a deeper truth. And so, for a long time it troubled me, this question of truth and falsity. And now I think that it's more like this, that the person who has the best idea, or let's put it this way, the best idea, and that means the funniest idea, the idea that brings the small smile to the corners of your mouth, that idea will win. It will win. It's Twee, the cheerful.
You know, Twee treads on the tail of the tiger. No blame. No blame because the cheerfulness of Twee overcomes the inherent reticence of the world. The light touch is the right touch.
And we could be laughing, and that would not make what we were discussing one bit less serious. Solemnity, on the other hand, I mean, I don't know what it's for. I mean, what is the point of it? The two most beautiful memorial services that I've ever attended both had a lot of humor, and it somehow freed us all and made the services inspiring and cathartic. But solemnity, it serves pomposity, and the self-important always know at some level of their consciousness that their egotism is going to be punctured by humor. That's why they see it as a threat. And so dishonestly pretend that their deficiency makes their views more substantial, when it only makes them feel bigger. No, humor is an essential part of spontaneity, an essential part of playfulness, an essential part of the creativity that we need to solve problems, no matter how serious they may be. So, when you set up a space-time oasis, giggle all you want. And there, ladies and gentlemen, are the 5 factors which you can arrange to make your lives more creative. Space, time, confidence, and Lord Jeffrey Archer.
Well, now the nation state is being put out to pasture. It's being told, as the church was told in the 17th century, you care for the poor. You take care of the highways. You bury the dead and you educate the children. But all the stuff which makes money, we, the new streamlined form of social organization, will take care of the money-making enterprise, and your job is to keep the roads cleared and the dead out of sight. And so this is happening. When I understood this, it was like a bolt of lightning. When Jesse Helms stood up on the floor of the U.S. Senate and called for the assassination of the American president, I realized this has become a circus. These people are yahoos. When was the last time a governor of the World Bank threatened the life of an American president? When was the last time that someone who sits on the board of directors of the IMF felt the need to physically threaten the life of a president? No, it doesn't happen. Real power doesn't act that way. Only pseudo-power, yahoo power, thug power acts that way. And so government has become largely irrelevant. And I don't know whether this is good or bad. It certainly is complex. War was an instrument of national policy for governments. War is not an instrument of policy for corporations. They hate war. But governments kept cultures in a deep freeze. We spend a lot of time lamenting the destruction of Aboriginal cultures, this rainforest tribe, that Central Mexican language group, so forth and so on. But while we're lamenting the loss of these exotic cultures, notice that your culture is being erased. If you were, raised in a close-knit Jewish family, if you were raised in a small town in the Midwest, those cultures are gone for most people. We have all been given mall culture and commodification of values. It isn't only happening to the Witoto and the Huichol, it's happening everywhere. This uniformitarianism of culture is entirely for the convenience of market economies. You know, if you can get everyone drinking the same brand of vodka, it's much easier to sell and market vodka than if you have to appeal to ethnicity and local tastes and so forth and so on. So everything is being leveled, dumbed down, and subjected to a hideous homogenization process.
Well, that really is all I can tell you that won't help you to be creative. Everything. And now, in the 2 minutes left, I can come to the important part, and that is how to stop your subordinates becoming creative too, which is the real threat. Because, believe me, no one appreciates better than I do what trouble creative people are and how they stop decisive, hard-nosed bastards like us from running businesses efficiently. I mean, we all know we encourage someone to be creative. The next thing is they're rocking the boat, coming up with ideas and asking us questions. Now, if we don't nip this kind of thing in the bud, we'll have to start justifying our decisions by reasoned argument and sharing information, the concealment of which gives us considerable advantages in our power struggle. So, here's how to stamp out creativity in the rest of the organization and get a bit of respect going. 1, allow subordinates no humor. It threatens your self-importance, especially your omniscience. Treat all humor as frivolous or subversive. Because subversive is, of course, what humor will be in your setup, as it's the only way that people can express their opposition. Since if they express it openly, you're down on them like a ton of bricks. So let's get this clear. Blame humor for the resistance that your way of working creates. Then you don't have to blame your way of working. This is important. And I mean that solemnly. Your dignity is no laughing matter. Second, keeping ourselves feeling irreplaceable involves cutting everybody else down to size. So don't miss an opportunity to undermine your employees' confidence. A perfect opportunity comes when you're reviewing work that they've done. Use your authority to zero in immediately on all the things you can find wrong. Never balance the negatives with positives. Only criticize, just as your school teachers do. Always remember, praise makes people uppity. Third, demand that people should always be actively doing things. If you catch anybody pondering, accuse them of laziness and or indecision. This is to starve employees of thinking time because that leads to creativity and insurrection. So, demand urgency at all time, use lots of fighting talk and war analogies, and establish a permanent atmosphere of stress, of breathless anxiety and crises. In a phrase, keep that mode closed. Now, in this way, we no-nonsense types can be sure that the tiny, microscopic quantity of creativity in our organization will all be ours. But let your vigilance slip for one moment and you could find yourself surrounded by happy, enthusiastic, and creative people whom you might never be able completely to control ever again. So be careful. Thank you and good night.
The chaos is roving through the system and able to undo at any point the best laid plans. The I Ching says never confront evil directly and never name it directly because it finds weapons to defend itself. We are not an army. This is what Frederick didn't understand. He was a king, but he was not an army when it came to the White Mountain. We are not an army, so our strategy must be stealth. It's an alchemical strategy, and what do I mean by stealth? I mean
the house of constipated reason must be infiltrated by art, by dreamers, by vision. And what is new is that there are massive technologies available to us, not available in the 60s. They were not designed for us. They were not intended for us. It was never ever thought that such power should flow into the hands of freaks such as ourselves. Nevertheless, through the perverse nature of the unfolding of the world, we have such tools. And I'm referring, as you probably anticipate, to the World Wide Web and the Internet. No gay kid in Montana, no Chinese scholar in Botswana, no person anywhere with a specialized interest or predilection now need feel alone. There is no aloneness. You can find your people. You know, one of the things Tim Leary said in the 60s that I always remembered, but I never heard anybody talk about or ever really heard him quote. It was a great rallying cry. It was much better than turn on, tune in, drop out. And it was this. It was find the others. Find the others. And then you will know what to do. Well, now you can find the others. You don't have to stick a flower in your hair and go to San Francisco. You just go to the web. Find the others. We all need to create affinity groups, which are subsets of the much larger community that we're part of. And then, using this technology, which was designed to keep track of us, to pick our pockets, and to sell us junk we don't want, use this technology to produce art, massive amounts of subversive art. And all art is subversive. I'm not calling for an ideological agenda. All truth which springs from the individual is subversive because, and this is a theme of mine that I'm getting more and more into the longer I live, culture is not your friend. This is an odd message for the late 90s because we're all being told, you know, you knew you were Jewish, but you forgot your Sicilian grandmother. You have to honor all of your family. You're Romanian, bring it forward, the dances of this, that, and the other. I hate all of this stuff. I'm Irish. It's a weird thing to be. It's a haunted, twisted people as a people. All peoples, meaning tribes, have horrible stories to tell about who they did under and who they screwed over. And when you're asked to identify with your culture, you're asked to take this on. I reject it. My brother, years ago, invented this term. He called it extra-environmental. He said, this is what we want to be. We don't want to be Americans or Germans or English. We want to be extra-environmentalists. Always feel, wherever you go, that you are a stranger, the outsider, the one looking in. This is the viewpoint that makes all places the same to you. There's a wonderful English poet and writer, Rudyard Kipling, and he wrote a children's short story called The Cat Who Walked by Himself. And it's a story of how the dog came to the cave of man and would lay at the man's feet. But the cat would never come. And when the woman asked the cat why it would never come, it said, I am the cat who walks by himself, and all places are alike to me. And I think transcending our cultures is going to be extraordinarily necessary for our survival. I don't think we can carry our cultures through the keyhole of the stretch of the next millennium. Well, how do you shed your culture? How do you transcend your culture? By digging into your soul with the tools that have been given you to make art. This is how cultures are transformed, by art which flows up and actually submerges the previous cultural forms. I mean, the Baroque gave way to later periods simply out of exhaustion. But notice, a style can exhaust itself and still continue, as mannerism did out of the Renaissance, for example. And when these exhausted styles are allowed to continue, they become toxic. They become moribund. It's like keeping a corpse around the house. There is an obligation to overthrow that, to produce the new, to produce the novel. And by the novel, I don't mean the literary form, I mean all things new. And then it is not the function of the artist to be the critic. The winnowing out, the deciding what is good from what is bad comes later. And that's a community process. The community decides what is good and bad art, but the individual should pour this forth. I mean, this is what you are. You are some kind of a mystery suspended between two eternities. And in that moment, when a mind looks out at a world and asks the question, what is it? In that moment, art can be created. And it is the only form of immortality that I have any certainty of. And it's available to everyone. And at the present moment, I make no distinction between art and technique. I mean, to my mind, these things are the same thing. A great turning point is in the offing. The world is changing. It's changed before, but not for a long time in our lives. Not since before our lives. But now it's changing. And there are many, many possibilities. The English biologist Dawkins invented the word meme. Do you all know what a meme is? It's the smallest unit of an idea. It's like what a gene is to biology. A meme is to ideology. And so our task is to create memes. Madonna is a meme. Catholicism is a meme. Marxism is a meme. Yellow sweaters are a meme. Create memes. Rainbow-colored dreadlocks are a meme. Launch your meme boldly and see if it will replicate, just like genes replicate, and infect and move into the organism of society. And believing as I do that society operates on a kind of biological economy, then I believe these memes are the key to societal evolution. But unless the memes are released to play the game, there's no progress. So I think the obligation on people such as ourselves, and I assume probably without exception, everybody in this room falls into the upper 5% of the Earth's population in terms of wealth, education, and freedom. Even if you're some poor, pierced metalhead from the dark side of Mannheim, you have a better situation than most people on this planet, a better chance at actually reaching out toward the machinery that shapes reality and having an impact. Well, so then the question becomes, or for some people it's, well, but I have nothing to say, or I have nothing to paint, or I have nothing to communicate. Well, clearly you're not taking enough drugs then. That excuse simply will not be tolerated. If someone finds that decadent or flippant or destructive, then they don't understand what these psychedelic substances are. They open the doorway to creativity. They cleanse the doors of perception. And then, as Blake said, reality is perceived as it truly is, as infinite. Part of what is wrong with our society, and hence with ourselves, is that we consume images. We don't produce them. We need to produce, not consume media. The media is a huge issue. You can't escape it. So what are you going to do about it? The only solution is to drive it, to take charge. Otherwise, you will be poisoned by it. And as more and more people are waking up to this, essentially we are seeing, I think, a huge artistic revolution, a revolution in values that reaches into science, that reaches into politics, that reaches into every aspect of life, but that is coming from the imagination, thoroughly stimulated and activated by the discovery of all these natural and synthetic substances which perturb the mind. And I'm not denying that a certain amount of social chaos goes along with this, but on the other hand, I can point to pretty psychedelically pure centuries like the 13th in Europe, and there was still plenty of social chaos going on. I don't think you can lay social chaos at the feet of psychedelics. I think social chaos is an inimical part of the system. What psychedelics do is they give a direction to that chaos, a dimension of vertical ascent, because inevitably out of the psychedelic situation emerges not despair, not self-indulgence, but wild-eyed idealism. That's the inevitable product of any psychedelically driven social process. How well that idealistic idea then brokers its way to the throne, if it does, is another issue. I don't know if I've hit this technological thing hard enough. I hope that you all avail yourselves of the power of the Internet. In years past, in speaking to audiences in America, it was maddening to me to find that the environmentalists, the feminists, the gays, the psychedelic people, and I'm not sure if I got everybody, and the space people, the colonization people, none of these people had anything to say to each other. They didn't seem to realize that their marginality united them far more than any difference they might perceive in their positions. And they didn't seem to realize that their political disempowerment was a product of their inability to make common cause with people similarly motivated or similarly motivated toward social change. So it's very important to build an inclusive community and a community that has a sense of direction. And I think the Internet empowers this far more than any other tool that has been handed to us except psychedelics. And if you take psychedelics and the Internet and music and put all of that together, you have the basis for a new community that is wider and deeper than you know. The people who are building the new machines, who are designing the new circuitry, who are writing the new code, are all freaks. They work for capitalist dogs, of course, because we all do. But the creative thrust of these technologies is being driven by people just like you and me. And I think this is all tremendously positive. So, where am I in all of this? Well, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. And then finally, I guess, and I'll just close on this, the alchemical return. All culture is some kind of myth. All cultural stories, then, have a psychic dynamic to them, which is not suspected by the civilization as it lives these myths. It has to be seen from outside. And there is a consistent myth in let's call it just Western civilization without being too precise, a consistent myth. In the early Jews, you get it as the idea that God will enter history. With Christianity, you get it with the idea that man and God can be consubstantial. Again, in Islam, the insistence that God will enter history. And then modern science, strangely enough, dumps all of this theology, but maintains the idea that man can become as a god. In other words, the myth that is consistent throughout the entire Western experience is the myth of some kind of defining progressive experience. Well, now we have the power to realize this myth in some kind of, for want of a better word, an alchemical utopia. And I think it's very interesting that at this very high-tech moment in our adventure, the plants return, the humblest of all biology. The plants return and almost stand before us as a beacon and a promise. Have you noticed that plants do all their business with dirt and air? This is something we only wish we could do. Build an industrial society based on nothing more than the ambient dirt and the air flowing past. Building sugars and carbohydrates out of gaseous oxygen. I mean, this is quite a trick. The plants stand both in the psychedelic sense, but then in the larger sense of the vegetable kingdom, they stand for absolute Tao. They stand for the correct way for life to relate to its environment, effortlessly recycling, vegetatively propagating when necessary, sexually propagating when necessary, immune to pain, patient to the tune of centuries, always building up structure, always maintaining a leavening effect upon the land. All of these qualities of caregiving and notice, for example, that all the processes of biology occur below the boiling point of water. If we could build societies that did that, we work in the range of hundreds of degrees, thousands of degrees, fusing metals and creating toxicity. So I think the psychedelic plant revolution, which is leading toward the nanotechnological revolution. In other words, the imitating of nature at the atomic level in building of machines and the management of processes. What all of this is leading toward is a rarefaction, a good alchemical word, a rarefaction of the human imprint on this planet, a spiritualization of humanity, and a new order of mind, part machine, part human. Notice that the internet and the computers that it serves are actually made of the materials of the earth. They're largely metals, silicon, glass, copper, gold, silver. These are the products of demonic artifice. These are the things which the alchemists dreamed of. They transform space and time. They allow us to speak at a distance. They allow us to wander through libraries thousands of miles distant. No fact is too obscure, no person so hidden that you can't reach them. It is, in a way, the perfection of the magical ideal that was developed and unfortunately prematurely launched by Frederick the Elector and his wife here nearby at Heidelberg. And so I'm involved, as I said, in a process of bringing this story to many people who haven't heard it. It's a great story. It's a great myth that the underground community should make its own. And, I used it this evening just as the scaffold for this talk, but I tried to hit the things that are important to me, which are psychedelics, recovery of archaic lifestyles, use of media to subvert existing paradigms, empowerment of the individual through dissolving the ego through psychedelics, and whatever else. So, thank you for your patience and indulgence, and if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.